everybody, and welcome to part 3 of our Finding the Way 5-part webinar series with Cap Trieger, Finding the Way. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone's line is muted, but you have the ability to ask any question you'd like in the chat function. Just put it in the chat, and we will endeavor to address those a little later on in our brief 45 minutes together today. Up in your upper right-hand corner of your screen, there is a button for speaker view. Please put your Zoom on speaker view for enhanced enjoyment for all of the participants in this webinar. I am Eric Pinkert from Brand Culture, and with me, as always, is National and Wall Street Journal best-selling author Cap Trieger. And today we've got a very special guest, my friend Jamal Lewis of the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation, a public-private partnership that helps improve access and opportunities to drive innovations for all Georgians and beyond as part of the innovation ecosystem. It's great to have Jamal here, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about your impression of the book and the anecdotes that you took away given the work that you do to support innovation and early stage founders. So why don't we begin, Jamal, with you. Just tell us a bit about the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation, its unique mission, and your work there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Eric and Cap, for the opportunity to be here and share more about the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation. So as you stated, the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation is a statewide public-private partnership. The unique piece of this is that we're jointly supported by the state of Georgia and the private sector. And with that support from the state and our corporate and other partners, we're investing in the implementation and scale of innovative solutions and technologies, as well as the development and retention of future innovators for shared economic opportunities across the state. And I think the unique part about our mission is that we're guided by a mission to position Georgia as the technology and innovation capital of the East Coast.
Very eloquently and succinctly put, Jamal. And in just 3 short years, you've accomplished some amazing things in advancing innovation throughout Georgia and beyond. So look forward to hearing more about that. But before we do, Cap, if you could just give our participants a quick synopsis of Finding the Way for those who have not yet read or perhaps not made it fully through the book yet.
Thanks very much, Eric. Real excited to be here. One of the things I need to say up front is I have really enjoyed these connections in this webinar series with you and our other guests, and that's very much the case today with Jamal. I'm just a huge fan of Jamal. He's a total rock star, huge fan of Penn, what they're doing, real important to our state. By the way, I see Ricky Steele in the audience too, the king of networking. And just a great, flattered, humbled to be here with this group. So thank you. Finding the Way, The Entrepreneur's Tale is a business fiction book. It's the story of an entrepreneur finding the way and starting a new company. And along the way, I guess the main character grows as a leader. He goes through sort of a roller coaster of adventures with great mentors and challenges and mistakes and lessons along the way. And the idea is that readers can grow and learn along with them. And hopefully be better prepared to be an entrepreneur or leader in their own ventures.
Fantastic. Very, again, succinct synopsis of the book. And before meeting you, Cap, I had never met anyone named Cap, and that may be because Cap is a pen name. Can you just give us a little insight as to why you wrote this book under a pen name?
Hey, yeah, thanks, Eric. So, for one matter, the book has its roots in a real business, and there's some real people or combinations of people that turned into characters. It's based around a company that I started and sold a long time ago. And I just didn't want to throw anybody under a bus, particularly because they are combinations of characters, and I wanted to protect the innocent and the guilty. But also, I think having fiction and different names makes it easier to sort of take liberties with the story to serve the greater purpose. And really, I'm playing sort of a different game than a lot of other authors. I'm not promoting a consulting practice or a speaking tour. I'm really out to just help entrepreneurs and leaders And so found a pen name and trying to kind of keep anonymity through this process. So I picked Cap Trigger. I tell people I'm a capitalist tree hugger, and that name was available. I could get the URL, and so it was a good contraction of that.
Fantastic. Well, that makes perfect sense. Always good to protect the innocent. One of the obviously the name of this webinar series is the 5 Essentials, and there's a great deal of meat on those 5 essentials throughout Finding the Way. How important are the 5 essentials to the book, and do you have any advice for budding entrepreneurs who may be listening?
Well, first of all, I don't want anybody to think that there are only 5 essentials in building a business, or that these are the only lessons in the book, but they are really important. There are 5 sort of things that when I invest or mentor a company, I've tended to key on these things in a process that I look at maybe different than everyone else. There are a lot of great resources out there, and but I haven't found anything that looks at business model the way that I do, or that kind of walks you through understanding what your customer's really buying or what's underlying that, or even the sort of alignment that we talk about. And so since I couldn't find a book that describe, or find books that describe those things, I wanted to write my own. And I would say, you asked me a question when we got started with all this, Eric, several weeks ago. You asked me if I had to distill all of this into one thing, what would it boil down to? And it immediately hit me, purposeful intentionality. And there's probably more to be said, but I like that so much. I went out and bought the URL, purposefulintentionality.com. But I do think that, it can be empowering to feel like you're accomplishing something, to understand where you're going, to have that articulated. So I think that's where a lot of that comes from.
Well, maybe we'll have a sequel entitled Purposeful Intentionality to Finding the Way, a part 2. But that's an excellent orientation. Thank you, Cap. So last week, as you noted, Cap, that we talked about understanding what your customer is buying in that essential. And today's focus is on integrating the right people and resources. And so I'd like to turn first to Jamal, given your experience working with innovators, early stage nonprofits, entrepreneurs, and interns. How important is integrating the right people, and why is this so challenging?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. So I believe that this is probably one of the most important essentials, in my opinion. What we work in is a relationship and a people business, which means our ability to attract and retain the right people and resources is directly connected to the impact of our work and the organizational culture that it's created. In my opinion, it is also essential to my success and my ability to support the innovators that we have the opportunity to interact with through the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation. So, a lot of this begins with being intentional and purposeful with the way that we interact and communicate with different communities, the programs that we create and how we create them, to the processes developed and to elevate and to support those entrepreneurs. And so when you don't have that right mix of resources and people in place, it becomes very challenging to hit your goals and to really understand and set a organizational culture that I believe drives a lot of the direction that the startups, or even if we look at the partnership itself as a startup, that we've taken.
Sure, got it. Well, Cap, same question to you. Why is this essential so underrated and overlooked when people are first starting out?
So, Eric, before I answer that, I got to do another shout out. I see Tanya Hall in the audience. She is my publisher and friend, and really awesome. So, got to call her out. Anybody, if you ever want to write a book, check out Tanya Hall at Greenleaf. And anyway, but to answer your question, you asked about why we missed the importance of this, and it's kind of like what your customer is really buying last week. The part of the problem is, on the surface, the answer seems real obvious and simple. We all sort of are aware of Jim Collins and getting the right people in the right seat on the bus. Of course, that's a huge deal. But I think it goes beyond that to having the right stakeholders in every position. The difference between starting your business with the right lawyer or the right accountant as an advisor is huge. The difference between finding the right mentor or having too many of the wrong ones can be massive in your business. And even finding the right sort of bank and banker within that knows how to get things done that's a fit for your business can make a huge, huge difference. And so really all stakeholders in your business, beyond just sort of the obvious ones. I think sometimes we go with what's convenient instead of finding who's the best fit. And it even makes me harken back way before Jim Collins, my best mentor, maybe 28, 30 years ago, had me do an exercise where he said, forget about all the people that are in your business now. And instead, take a piece of paper to represent every position in your org chart. And he said, draw a circle, a big circle that fills the whole page. And then write within that, the title of the job and what the person looks like that fills that job. So any characteristics or whatever, just forgetting everybody but what the ideal situation is, and lay it out like your org chart. And so I did that. And then he said, now forget all that and think about all the people that are already engaged in your business. And this is sort of like the Jim Collins thing, but he had me write down all their characteristics and then lay the pieces of paper from my existing people into the components on my org chart. And it was interesting. There were some fits and some misses, but then he had me do the same thing for my banker, my lawyer, my accountant, my advisors, mentors, investors, later board members. And I think finding that kind of alignment. And then the other thing is, I think we sort of limit ourselves, Eric, with our current constraints. We limit ourselves by what we know now. And I'm a big fan instead of finding the best fit and then figuring out how to get them. So instead of saying, who's the best board member I can get, who's the best chief technology officer, instead figure out who the best one is and then figure out how to get them involved. And if they're the right fit, a lot of times they're attracted to what you're doing. So just a little bit different perspective on this.
Yeah, getting the right profile for what you need to accomplish versus trying to shoehorn. That certainly makes a lot of sense. When starting out in particular, however, but for a few well-known unicorns that grab up headlines and talk about all of their billions, most young organizations are under-resourced. And I imagine a founder may feel that they really need to get greater people and resources than their current circumstances allow. So how do you determine when it's the right time to bring on new tools and people? And how would you advise companies making tough choices about what comes first? And I'll put it first to you, Cap, and then ask Jamal to weigh in.
Well, Eric, of course, this is the age-old question that once you're a successful business, there's always this issue. And in the book, I call it morphability. Someone made the point that the second surest way to fail is not to change when you need to, and the surest way is to change too often. So knowing when and how to do that is always sort of the challenge. But I think there are sort of empirical ways to let, if you can allocate where your revenues are, where your customers are pulling you, it can help you do that. And then getting the best people, I always sort of took it as a challenge. I can remember a mentor a long time ago saying, if you can sell somebody on your vision, if they believe in you, they're willing to take a risk and they're willing to, restructure or accept different compensation or different incentives to join you. And if you can't, you need to take a hard look in the mirror. And so, I always saw it as sort of a litmus test, but I found tremendous. I was shocked a lot of times building the business in the book when we were able to get really great big time people to accept a lot less compensation, a lot tougher challenges because they bought us and the vision that we were selling for who we wanted to be and what we wanted to do.
Sure, that counts for a lot, and often more than dollars. Jamal, anything to add to what Cap said about enlisting and attracting the right people and resources?
Yeah, no, I think Cap summed it up very well. I would just add that again, it really, as he stated earlier in the conversation, like that full team and really understanding what pieces that you need. I think the social capital piece is like a really good example of something that is often overlooked and underestimated. And we talk a lot about the capital and needing to hire, but the ability to also leverage partnerships, to leverage champions, as we call them at the partnership, the your innovation champions and people who can support you along your journey that may not necessarily be a mentor, but just maybe gatekeepers to communities that you're looking to get into, or other organizations. I think that's a really underutilized tool for young entrepreneurs or startup companies as well.
To be sure. Well, sticking with you for just a moment, Jamal, can you think of a time in your career where you found this to be especially important or especially dispositive in determining success?
Yeah. So, just going back to the social capital theme. So, as we go through at the partnership and through my economic opportunity pillar, and we look to have conversations to understand how we can best support entrepreneurs across the state and beyond, one common theme that I always hear is, everyone is interested or looking for capital. And because we are a funding providing organization, that tends to be the center focus of the initial touch point. But as you really start to peel back the layers and have conversations, you realize that there's a social capital piece. And when I say social capital, these are your communities, the rooms that we have, rooms like this, the ability to connect with people like Cap when you're from under-resourced, underserved areas. And what I found is, honestly, once you have the social capital, the mentors, you've identified your target audience, and you really have a great understanding of how to position and market your MVP and make those connections, it becomes exponentially easier to get access to capital in those ways. So a lot of times when I'm working with these startups and these founders, I always like to take a step back and just understand, who are your partners, who's supporting you, and how can we help amplify that or maybe scale that support and see how we can, increase the ROI or, the type of investments that are available to the company.
Great advice about getting those resources, particularly when you're not familiar with the various avenues and options in that regard. Cap, switching from resources to people, and of course, people are resources, but I'm drawn to the example that in the book of BART, when you needed to bring on a president and you had to engage in some rather intense negotiations. Don't want to limit your answer, but how do you enlist the people and come to terms when they've bought into the vision, but they also have families to feed and other motivations as well?
Oh, great question, Eric. And interesting example. So Bart is based on a character real high-powered, brilliant guy, and he was making 10 times what we could afford to pay him at the company. And he came to join us because he believed in our vision and where we wanted to go, but and was willing to accept a lot less cash in exchange for ownership and opportunity. But as you said, he had a family to feed, and as you know, keeping the lights on is not cheap. And so it was a constant battle. But I will say, in that case, I'm a fan of not necessarily limiting commissions, and it sort of opens up a can of worms. But we allowed him to sort of keep what he killed in terms of some opportunities for the business, with the caveat that we protected. We were even though we didn't limit the amount of upside or commissions that he could earn in driving the business forward, we did sort of protect against, I think sometimes people sell things that are not in the best interest of the company. Right. And so it was always sort of an ongoing challenge to keep him happy and sell what we could deliver in a good way to the right people. But obviously we're able to make it work for him and for the company. So I think in some cases for a high level thing like that, you just got to be creative, but careful in advance, protecting both sides. It was important for me in that case to protect his interest as well. And so I think we went through and came out of it from a position of trust and then just kind of evolved as circumstances did.
Yeah, that's a really important point that you make in the book, is that tension between the sales organization out making promises and then the those in the organization responsible for delivering on those promises. And on the one hand, you want the salespeople to be a little ahead to push you forward, but not so far ahead that it creates emergency conditions. And so having that blend of those two types of roles and also personalities is essential for a high growth organization. Jamal, I'd like to you've talked about the positive aspects and the opportunities. I'd like to hear you opine on some of the pitfalls. Are there mistakes that you see founders or new organizations making where they're not necessarily advancing their own interests as effectively as they could be because of unforced errors?
Yeah, I think just having a good thumbprint on the culture of the organization and how that changes. So, a lot of times what we see is that when a founder has started the company or the idea, like on the back of the napkin, there's these grand ideas of what the mission and the vision for the organization is. But as you grow, as you take in capital or you take in those resources that we talked about today, that has the ability a lot of times to impact the vision or the culture of the organization. And so, a lot of the entrepreneurs that we, work with, when we get them within our Innovate for All process and we start to really work with them, we start to understand that sometimes there's a disconnect. They're still focused or hanging on to that, how they classified or saw themselves when they wrote the company's mission or started to architect it on the back of the napkin versus where they are now in this growth scale phase. And so that tends to be where you're making decisions based on where you were and not where you are or where you're going. And so you really want to understand, the markets or the communities, your customers, who you're doing business with and who you're messaging to, and making sure that who you're hiring aligns with the values. So that way, again, as you go out and you're externally facing, with this being a relationship business, that the individuals that you put out front, as well as the messaging, the marketing, it all still aligns and makes sense with the brand itself.
Yeah, since Darwin, we've known that it's not the strongest to survive, but the most adaptable. And so that need for that organizational dexterity to respond to where you are versus where you want to go is essential. Cap, anything to add to Jamal's comments?
I just want to echo what Jamal said, and again, it brings us back to sort of the morphability that we talked to in the book. But I will say I'm a fan of objective data to support personnel decisions. It makes it less personal. So, I like to fight battles up front to come where we agree on this is sort of who we are and where we're going with responsibilities, and then have sort of numbers attached to that so that, like all of you, I love people. I want the best for everyone and their families. And so therefore we get really subjective about, what our goals should be. And so I think if you can make it more empirical, more data driven in some cases, it helps to make better decisions. And particularly going back to the morphability when pulled there by, where the business needs to go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in addition to getting the right people and resources to fuel your growth, one of the less pleasant tasks is getting rid of those who are not. And so there's that old adage, hire slow, fire fast. And it's often a unpleasant and not always readily apparent dynamic when someone is no longer a fit for the organization, either because it's changed, they've changed, or simply their skill set is no longer what's needed in the role. Jamal, how in your experience has this been borne out in the organizations that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a little different because a lot of my experience is really based in the public sector. So it's not a hire slow, fire fast situation.
Okay.
In these typical circles, it really is more of a you have to do a lot in the public sector to to get fired. But I think what it really boils down to is exactly what you said is, at a certain point, when you know where you're going, you have that roadmap, and as Cap said, you have the data to support it. There comes a point where I've experienced this in organizations that I've been a part of, where you feel like your job or your role is done. And I think what I've learned through my experiences is that there are categories of personalities that work within organizations, from leadership down to just entry level. But typically you have those individuals who are builders, who like to create those new things. So they really thrive in that first phase of the startup. But as you transition out of startup into scaling, you need a developer. You need someone who's actually looking at, okay, this is what we've done, where we're going, and how can we get there. And then you have people who are fixers. So they really thrive in organizations that are a little chaotic, maybe don't have those processes and procedures in place. And then you have the pilot, right? So that's the person who typically, keeps everything smooth sailing. And so I think it just becomes inherently obvious to the individual. And sometimes, that individual may not always make the decision. But, as an organization, going back to what Cap said, is like we have to use fact-based, logic and methods. So data-driven, ways to be able to determine, like, are we still hitting our goals? Are we meeting our objectives? Or has the direction of the company changed to where we just need a different fit? And you have to be quick to do that, because I believe the longer you head, my mentor used to tell me this, and I really stick to it. If you're looking to drive to New York, the longer you drive towards Florida, it does you no good, right? It just takes you longer to get to your final destination. So you really have to make a decision, quickly, but based on the facts, to get you moving in the right direction to where you want to go.
Right. Great analogy there. Cap, I'm all for objective criteria and using the data to dictate decisions for hiring and firing, but sometimes it's complicated, right? Where you yourself will be part of the data set and may not have all of the facts. And I'm thinking of the example with your head of R&D, who was manipulating the organization and manipulating you a bit to make it seem like you had a closer personal relationship than you did, while he was spending more time surfing the web than actually driving research and development forward. So what do you do in a situation like that?
And before I respond, I'll echo. I really like Jamal's analogy, as you pointed out with the driving. The world moves fast, and in some of the universes, some of these companies, not moving fast can be a challenge. But I'll say this is another thing maybe I look at a little different than some people. I realize that some organizations, their MO, when you go in that they're going to hire slow and fire fast. I've tended to go the other way. I hire slow, but I also tend to fire slow. And I'll live with that. It's kind of one of those things, danged if you do, danged if you don't. But it's easy when somebody does something. I say it's easy. The decision's easy when someone does something unethical or illegal. Then it's very obvious. But even then, I feel terrible for their families. The families haven't done anything wrong, and I always feel like I failed at some point. If I brought somebody in who brought somebody else in, and they're not a fit, or the company evolves. So I'd rather try everything else first. I like the old Jack Welch thing. No one should ever get surprised when they're let go. And so, yeah, I'll err on the side of waiting too long. I don't think it's fair to expect people to show any loyalty to you if you don't show loyalty to them. And I'm going to be slower to fire probably than a lot of people. But that's one of those things we let people know if it's a situation where we might need to move fast to make changes fast. At least let people know up front that's your culture, and they know what they're buying into, and so to that. But as far as having the data, that can help. Some things are easier to quantify than others. And then the individual that you mentioned that was manipulating things, I've run across those circumstances from different angles in a number of cases, and every one of them is different. But I will say, in situations where somebody's tried to manipulate things or make you dependent on them, um, that sort of thing can become poisonous within an organization. And so my mentors have always kind of steered me. If anybody does that, they'll probably do it again. And so, at some point, the way I guess my best mentor put it to me is he said, look, you have an obligation to your customers, to the other people at the company, and to your shareholders. And if you go out of business, you're not helping anyone. And so I can't tell you how many times, I feel terrible when we need to make changes. And then, the person that we made the change from ended up in a better spot. So, if it's the right thing to do and you can support it and have justification, then, at least recognize that in the long run, sometimes you're doing what's best for that person as well.
No, that's a great perspective, and I've certainly found that often is the case, that it's better for the organization and actually better for the individual involved. But it's easy to lose sight of that in the heat of the moment. Well, we'll turn to audience questions in just a minute, but I'd like to ask Jamal, what is the one main lesson that you hope that folks will take away from our discussion today?
I would say the main lesson is, I guess what Cap talked about on just putting the time to be slow to hire as well as slow to fire. So, having that empathy within the organization. But, I think a lot of times, and this came out, I believe it's chapter 29 in the book, but that process of getting to know the candidate as the organizational culture had been established and they were looking to bring in someone new that you really wanted. And a lot of times our just human nature takes over when we really like a person, when we can relate to a person. It looks familiar, it feels right, but there are red flags and things that happen. But I would just say putting the time in on the front end to invest in who you bring in, how you bring them in, and really understanding how they could impact the success or negatively or positively impact the success of the company.
Very, very thoughtful response. Thank you. How about you, Cap? One main lesson for essential number 3.
I again want to echo what Jamal said, but yeah, I'm a big fan. I love people and I love learning about people. And if you give it a chance, you can find out about people. You can, I'm, of course, mentioned in the book about some relationships, but a lot of key hires, I try to go to dinner with people and learn sort of what's behind them, what motivates them. Do we have a shared purpose? Are we demonstrating? It's kind of like dating, I guess. If you date somebody that liked you for the wrong reasons, you're going to end up with that sort of person. But if you date someone that likes you for who you are, and that includes yourself, but your business, whatever, then sometimes you end up with a better fit in the long run.
Terrific. That's a great analogy. Well, turning to the audience questions, we have an audience question here. We talked a lot about when and how to let people go, and I think that's on me because I sort of directed the conversation in that area. But the question is, what's your number one advice to attract and keep top talent? And I'll ask Jamal first.
Well, yeah, I think I'll just go back to a response that I gave her earlier in the conversation and when we were talking. But I think it's really about being able to properly articulate the impact, the work that your organization is doing, and then setting a culture that really, I think Cap just talked about it. When you're wooing a person or you're recruiting a person to come into the business, it's like, we really like to put a lot of attention on that person and spend a lot of time. But oftentimes once they get within the organization, right, we really that focus, that time commitment actually dwindles, and that's to be expected. We can't spend that amount of time as you do when you're recruiting. But I think creating a culture where people feel valued, and we spend and work a lot together, especially in this really innovative digital connected age where we bring work home, we bring work on vacation a lot of times. So the people that you spend time with really matter. So I think, that is always important. And I think also, we talked about it when we focused on letting people go, but like, how can we help people grow within the organization, right? I think everyone wants or most people, I think, want the ability to be able to develop and move up and be able to show different talent. So how do we continue to give outlets and opportunities to do that? I think are really great ways of retaining talent.
Nurturing that potential and actualizing it. Yep.
Absolutely.
Cap, your one piece of advice to recruit and retain the talent that you need.
I'm going to echo a little bit what Jamal said with a very slightly different spin. But as he said, if you articulate who you are and where you're going, and you can share your vision, and people buy that and they're a fit for it, that part of it's easy. But I'm also a fan of I do a self-disqualifying thing a lot of times. I'll tell people, here's who we are, here's where we're going. If you fit this job description, if you fit what you're looking for, come join us. And if you don't, it's not going to work out well for you or for us. And so I think that's sort of just be real clear and upfront about expectations, fight your battles up front. And a lot of times the right people are going to gravitate to that and to that vision and the purpose and the articulated idea of where you're going. And if they're not, sometimes you can pick up in just the way they respond to it.
Yeah, having folks self-select out, then that, of course, obviates the whole discussion that I had about needing to let people go. So that's a very good point. Another question, Jamal, what can leaders do to build trust among their team members? Do you have any tactics and techniques that you use to help ensure trust?
Yeah, I would say just from the experience of the team I'm on currently, I think just the transparency of, the work that we're doing, the direction of the organization. I think that amongst the team, when you have the team all pulling in the same direction and we really understand where we're going, not actually how we're going to get there, because that's a lot of on the team to figure that out. But I think having clear direction and just that transparency about where the organization is, it goes a long way in establishing and building that trust, especially on newer teams or in newer organizations.
Absolutely. Completely aligned on that from my perspective. Cap, any techniques that you use to engender trust among team members?
And obviously, trust is essential. And when people, I'm such a fan of Penn and Jamal, and I think people are attracted to that and appreciate it because they trust Jamal and Deborah and their intentions, why they exist and where they're going, and can see what they're doing. I think that's a big deal, and that applies to for-profit, not-for-profit, everything we do. And so I guess there's a lot of tricks to being trusted, but if you get to a point where it's tricks, what do you really have? So there's a line in the book, and I like it so much, I put it in there twice, I think. The best way to get people to trust you is just to be trustworthy. And I think if you're genuine about that, if you would, take things to the grave and honor your intentions and mean what you say and say what you mean, people pick up on that. They learn over time. And if you're not like that, they pick up on that too. So anything else is short-sighted. And so again, just huge fan. Here's who we are. Here's what we're going to be, and live to that. And maybe you have to change, but if you do, then be as clear and transparent and upfront about that as you can be as well.
Hard to argue with if you want to engender trust, be trustworthy. Not always easy in execution, but certainly something to be aspired to. Another question, Jamal, is there a general rule about which executives should be brought on first, next, and last? Or does it completely depend on the organization and what the nature of its business is?
Yeah, so I would love to defer to Cap on this. I'll just say, really quickly from our experience with the partnership and, building this out. It really makes sense to, again, like what is at the core, what is the mission? So, we had some given guidelines based on the task force that created us. And we really wanted to be able to have like some really quick outcomes that we can prove and validate the concept of this public-private partnership. So I think the way we were structured is that we really wanted to fill out our pillars first. And then we bootstrapped like most startups would do, right? We worked with a smaller team, and we still are a very lean team, maybe adding on 3 additional positions since I've started. But again, we really wanted to build out what Deborah has envisioned as our leadership team through community research, economic opportunity, workforce development, and student engagement, along with our executive director. And now we've added on the operations piece, our strategic relations piece, and looking to expand the team. So I think it really just depends on what your goals are.
Well, that cadence certainly makes a lot of sense to me. Cap?
So, Eric, I want to again echo what Jamal just said. Things start with leaders, and my degree is in something called industrial engineering. So I always want protocols and rules and set up things to succeed. But I wonder if sometimes we spend too much time preparing sort of the system and the process for the people, when maybe the best answer is to start with the right people and have them set up the right process and systems. And so, every time I walk into a business or of any kind, it could be retail, restaurant, manufacturing company, or any kind of institution. I walked into a school lately, and I said, this school has the right leader. And the right leader solves a lot of those things. So as far as when to bring them in, I tend to and again, going back to the morphability and letting sort of the data and where the business needs to go drive it. But I think I would rather start higher and build down, start with the end in mind, where we're going. And as far as integrating or finding the rules, sometimes instead of me putting rules in place, I want to bring in a Jamal who's the right leader and say, here, Jamal, here's where we're going. Here's the vision. You institute the rules, because he'll do it better than I would for those things under his responsibility. So I start with the Jamal that's in charge and Deborah, and then they'll be better qualified than me to fill in the components that go with them, and job descriptions and so forth.
Great actionable advice. And we will let you have the last word, Cap. Finding the Way, there's a lot more where that came from. It's a national and Wall Street Journal bestseller, people, and read it and you'll see why. I'd like to invite you to stay connected to the Finding the Way community on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Finding the Way is available where fine books are sold everywhere, from small independents to the world's largest booksellers, as well as in airports and kiosks everywhere. Jamal, I'd really like to give you a special shout out of thanks for joining us from the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation. To learn more about what the partnership is doing to support early stage companies and organizations and innovators, please visit pengeorgia.org. And please join us as well next week for essential number 4, Find the Right Customer-Driven Business Model. We'll be here again, same time, same place. And I wish all of you a very pleasant Tuesday afternoon and evening. Thanks for joining us.